insights, not just about customers, but insights that will help you grow your business from strength to strength. And that's at the heart of all CRM. And exactly the point that I just made. If you come to the next slide, the truth about brands. Customers aren't loyal to the company that provides the service. They are loyal to the people who provide them the service. It is the people behind the products, behind the brand, who customers are loyal to. In every business, the last mile, you might be in an FMCG company where you're not interacting with the customer, but your retailer is interacting with the customer. And what is the protocol with which he interacts with the customer determines the impression that he creates about the brand, about the company. So those things, it's the people who matter, and that is what is another fundamental truth of customer relationship management. You might create great products, very insightful products, but if the people who are delivering them to the customer do not do a good job of representing themselves well, representing your products well, representing your company well, all of it, just gets discounted. Another truth, if you move on to the next slide, which says the customer belongs to everyone. Another truth about customer centricity is that today gone are those days when customer belonged to one department. In some companies, the customer belongs to the customer service department or the call center. In some other department, the customer belongs to the marketing department. Today, I think that thing of that the customer belongs to one function and somebody else needs to focus on creating products and somebody else needs to focus on creating strategy. Those days are gone because the customer is ubiquitous. He is almost omnipresent. Whether it is one wrong tweet from anybody in your finance department who's got nothing to do with customer centricity, okay, can throw up a legal challenge for the company. A blog post written by an employee can actually take you to a situation where it can bring you down to the ground. Or a CEO who has not reacted well, a customer has complained on an online channel and he does not get a response back from the CEO of the company. He can go and actually malign your reputation at the drop of a hat. So today, the empowered customer has an expectation that service and communication is but a click away. Now that poses very different kinds of challenge. And that culture of customer centricity, that customer is at the core, and every employee, whether it is the security guard, in your office, or whether it is the CEO, they all need to actually think of the customer first. If you have not briefed your security guard well in terms of when a customer comes in and he's waiting at the reception, how is he greeted? Is he actually given a smile and asked to wait, or is he made to stand outside because the security guard is too busy chatting with somebody or picking up and attending to a phone? All these leave impressions on clients. We are all customers of one or the other product before we are actually professionals. If you go to a bank and if you have to stand in a long queue versus a bank today, which has created a whole environment of customer centricity, it takes you very little to switch your account and move on to a bank that gives you, that makes you feel, that treats you very warmly and treats you in a very friendly way. So loyalties are switching as far as consumers are concerned towards companies where people treat their customers, very well. The Web 2.0 is a game changer. And while consumer engagement was prevalent even before social media appeared on the horizon, it has now acquired completely new dimensions. Consumers' opinions today can make or mar a brand's reputation. I don't know how many of you read the newspaper today. In Economic Times, there are 3 youngsters who've developed an app that can actually just give you ratings and rankings. I mean, the value of having collective input from a whole lot of people disconnected with your problem, who will give you, they feel, as genuine advice is more valuable than any amount of advertisements or word of mouth you can create about your company. Because consumer opinions is what customers are trusting, because they are neutral, they are not biased, and they are collective and aggregated. So that input is much better than any other input. So today, consumer opinions can make or mar a brand's reputation. Very easy for an upset customer to express his dissatisfaction by posting a tweet or a blog via his smartphone just when he experiences it. He does not even have to wait to reach his desk. He can actually he has a phone in hand, he is everywhere, he is upset, and he will just post it then and there. I am at the airport counter, I get very bad service from Jet Airways, they do not switch my flight, they make me wait. I can just from then and there post my comment on Facebook and create a kind of a rally around of many other people who similarly experienced bad treatment, and create a kind of a group, and take the collective might of taking a company is much, much bigger than what an individual can do in his capacity. And organizations have today realized that. They've realized that it is much better to prevent this than to let it spread. And marketing department and customer service departments, whichever department manages customer, can become a custodian of the customer agenda. They can't become a custodian of customer. When I mean that one function can own the agenda, which means that they can create a culture, they can create processes, they can help the organization actually create this culture and processes behind customer centricity. So that can be owned by a department, that you become the proponents, you become the kind of passionate brand ambassadors of this agenda, you help with the science, you help with the techniques of it all, but they don't own the customers. The responsibility of owning the customers has to be spread out. It's like completely like an amoeba which can spread anywhere, like I said, from a security guard to a CEO. And moving on to the next slide, which just sums this section up to say a customer relationship management strategy is not a luxury, it is a necessity for survival today. Because your reputation on service, once broken, can never be fixed. If you have a bad product, you can go back to the laboratory, you can recreate the product, you can relaunch it, you can come back, you would have lost some money, but you can come back with a better product and you will actually be able to beat the market. And that's so visible in the automobile industries today. There are products that have failed, but there are superior products that have come in the marketplace, as long as the company's reputation about service has stayed intact. And you can apply this to every product that you interact with. Products are replaceable, reputation and experiences are not. So that's where most of the focus is shifting. Moving on to the traditional marketing, and today what I said, the customer focused marketing, customer relationship marketing. This is that slide that has the headline, how is customer relationship management different from traditional marketing? Fundamentally, one is a push-based approach, the other is a pull-based approach. In traditional marketing, the goal is to expand customer base, increase market share by mass marketing. That is what the goal of traditional marketing is. How do you spend more monies on advertisement? How do you reach out to as many people as possible, and through advertisement create imagery and goodwill? Okay, that is what traditional marketing was all about. It was about a product-oriented view. I have a superior product, I have created a very sharp proposition, let me do mass marketing, okay, and I will have the customers coming and buying my product. Now that was a very transactional relationship with the customer, because their confidence in their product was so high. But those days are over. Today product is replaceable. In an era where there are so many choices available to the customer, and product is almost like a commodity today. You can switch from one toothpaste to another, You can switch from one hair oil to another. You can switch from one car brand to another. Products which are close to each other, there are at least 3 to 4 good choices available in a category in the same price point band at any given point of time. So in this kind of a scenario, it's the relationship management approach that actually makes it different. In the customer relationship management approach, the goal is to establish a profitable, long-term, one-to-one relationship with the customer. You might not be in a position sitting in the company to do one-to-one relationship. But if you created a culture of customer relationship where every employee within the corporate office, from the employee to the distributor and from the distributor to the retailer, if you created this culture and you are actually not incentivizing on product margins, but you start incentivizing on customer experience feedback today, you will actually change the game for your business, because that is where the real differentiation comes. Product is a commodity getting replaced easily. Customer service is an experience which you do it at a personal level, and you can live with that experience and talk about it to 10 people. The goodwill that it generates is worth $1 million. So it's a relationship approach. It's not a transactional approach. It's not a customer-supplier relationship. It's a customer experience relationship. Moving on. Like I said, there's more to brands than brand communication. It is about people, and it's about people delivering those services, and it's about people consuming those services. So do not shift the attention from that. We've all heard about the 4 P's of marketing. The 4 P's of marketing is something that we've all grown up with. The Kotler's 4 P's of price, promotion, product. But if you move on to the 3 P's of customer centricity, this is where the real trick is and the real science is. It now starts breaking into something real about how can you do it. There are 3 things, like there are 4 P's at the heart of a customer manufacturing industry. If we do not add the 3 P's, you are doing half the job in terms of doing justice to your business. The first P of customer centricity is people. How are in people, you begin with the employees. How are the employees, sales, after sales, and customer service staff of your company handling your company brand? If you do not create this culture across the organization where you say that when it comes to taking difficult decisions, if there is a call center employee and she gets a call at the call center where a customer is actually screaming at her, if she is not empowered to take a decision, and if she has to trade off with a bias towards the customer, you will leave an irate customer who will eventually write to the next level. He will escalate it from the call center to the call center manager, from the call center manager to the company manager, from the company manager to the CEO. Eventually, you will have to take that call. But in the process, what you've done is, because you've not empowered the call center person to take the call then and there and to take the decision then and there, the calls keep getting escalated till you wasted and invested the time of many other people in the chain. And eventually, the CEO has had to take a call. Now, God forbid if the CEO, if the customer is right, okay, either you manage to convince the customer, but if the customer is right, and you've not taken a decision in favor of the customer, you've not just lost that individual, you have lost one bad customer is equal to 14, you lose 14 for one bad customer, other customers, because he will speak to many other people and prevent them from buying or prevent them from continuing with your product. So that is the power of people. We'll see more about that as we move forward. But these people have to be empowered by processes. Like I said, in today's technologically connected world, if the processes are not connecting, you will not be able to empower your people. How well is your call center connected to your customer database? How well is your customer database giving you real-time information about your customers? How well are your processes in terms of the time spent to interact with the customer? Do you have insight into how much time a customer is spending each time he's interacting with you when you walk into the branch or a bank branch? Let's take that example because that's a service branch. All that, you will not have that information if you do not have processes behind it. So technology and processes are another very critical step. So the intent needs to start translating into some real action. And the third thing which is very important about customer centricity is the physical evidence. If you are making your customer fill up any forms or any account statements, if we get an account statement from a bank or from a service shop, if you've sent your car for service, if that account statement is not simple, if it's not clear, if it's not transparent, you will feel very upset because the clarity with which the customers today are seeking information is phenomenal. They are saying, we want transparency. Please say it simply. Please make your physical documents that interact with the customer as simple and as transparent as possible, because that evokes trust in the brand. The trust in the brand comes if you know that a customer, that a company is transparent, they are not trying to hide anything. There are not too many ifs and buts and asterisks in a company's interaction with the customer. So physical evidence is very important. So the 3 P's of customer centricity are people, processes, and physical evidence. If we fix these 3, we have begun our journey well. So when you start looking at your own businesses, please look at all 3 aspects. Don't leave out anything. You might set great processes in place. You might create a nice culture of customer centricity supported by processes. But if your documents and if your brochures and if your forms look very complex, you're not solving for your problem. You're only doing half the job. I'll just spend a little more time on each of these. You moving on to the next slide. People. Does the staff know and feel the difference in their service versus the competition? Does the staff believe in customer centricity and its values? Is the staff empowered to customize and deliver the service to its different customers? All these 3 things. Remember how well the sabzi wala knows his customer. Remember how well the pan wala knows his customer. Now these are important things. How well does your staff know the customer and know also the competition? Because it's very important. You are not in an isolated world. You might be doing 5 things for the customer, but it's very important that the environment in which you are operating, those 5 things will have very quickly become hygiene, because competition is doing something which is 6th and 7th. And you have to be cognizant of how the external environment is changing. So the staffs have to be trained to keep their eyes and ears open for knowing what are the changes in the environment, how the competition is reacting, how the industry is moving. This culture of knowledge is very important in business. Does the staff believe in customer centricity and its values? Is the staff, like I said, empowered to customize and deliver the decision at the point on which the transaction is happening with the customer? All these 3 things are very important. Imagine, moving on to the next slide. If you get a call from a telemarketer and, he's got a database and he is calling you, and I am Miss Anisha Motwani, and the first thing that I hear is, Mr. Motwani, you get put off. The last thing you want to know is if a guy assumes he knows you, he's coming on the call addressing you with the first name, but he comes on the call and he addresses you as Mr. Motwani as against Miss Motwani or Mrs. Motwani. You get put off. Or if somebody, tries to get very personal and calls you by your name and mispronounces your name, you just form an opinion about that company then and there, saying that this is a very poor service. This guy doesn't even know how to pronounce my name well. You don't want to move forward with that company. So that various such small things, they might sound very silly, they might sound very small, but they are the first protocols of knowing your customer and managing him well. Because At each such step, what you do is you start creating an impression about your company. If you get a very refined call from a company, even if it doesn't connect you and you're not interested in their service, but because they've been nice to you, because they open their conversations well, because they address you properly, you at least hear them out. And human nature is that you speak in a tone in which you're spoken to. You would respond back saying, no, thank you, not this time, probably next time. But that is only if you know that you've been dealt a good deal. But if you've been misdealt, like I said, somebody mispronounces your name, somebody just starts in the middle of a call, you're in the middle of a meeting and a call comes in from a telemarketer, then that person starts rattling off this thing. I'm sorry, you have to ask the person, are you free? May I take a few minutes of your time? Is there any other better time at which I can call you? Now, these are all things where employees have to be trained. It is your responsibility as an organization, and that's what I mean by processes. Have you got processes in place where you are creating call center scripts, where you are creating telemarketing scripts, where you are actually writing it effectively, where you are then training your employees? That's part of the process. Have you trained them on various things? Are you hiring the right kind of people, the right profile of people? All these are processes. Now, these processes is what we are going to move on to next. Does the process allow for customization? Is it employee friendly and customer friendly? Employees come before customer. Please do not make the mistake of saying, I am doing everything for the customer at the cost of employees. If the employees do not believe in this, because finally the customer has to be, the service has to be delivered to the employees and the culture of employees, if not directly, indirectly at least in many cases. You as a business have to first get your teams engaged and get your teams to buy into this philosophy. That's very important. Is it in sync with the overall brand promise? The overall brand promise and customer promise need to talk to each other. You cannot have a brand promise which is at divergence from what your customer promises. Best companies are those where the customer promise, the brand promise, the product proposition are all aligned to a common purpose. Every business needs to have a common purpose. I just was in Disneyland attending a workshop on customer experience in US just last month, and we did a 2-hour workshop. They did a 2-day workshop for us on customer experience. Now, Disney has defined its common purpose as we provide happiness to our people by providing the finest entertainment to people of all ages. Now, that's the common purpose. Let me repeat it. We provide happiness to our customers by giving the finest in entertainment to customers of all ages. Now, they've taken that forward into their product, into their service, into the experience. They said Disney is not for children. It's for customers of all ages. They got it into the customer purpose statement. Customers of all ages means that the rides that they have created inside the Disney park are as much relevant for adults as they are for children. Not just for adults, people of all ages, even physically challenged people have rides there. Not just the rides. If there is a ride for a physically challenged person, the height of that ride, the speed of that ride, all of it is kept in mind the target audience and his needs and insights. We make people happy. That happiness has to be first imbibed amongst the employees. Whether it is the cleaner who is cleaning the theme park or whether it is the parking attendant, they are all happy and they're actually creating happiness. because they know that when people come to Disneyland, they want to forget their worries, they want to actually feel happy. Now, that's the purpose statement. Now, how have they brought this happiness alive through their customer journeys and through their customer experiences? There are at least 1,000-odd processes, 1,000-odd processes that run in the company that actually deliver this happiness to customers. It's the most inspiring example of customer service, and if some of you have access to, to the internet, you must go and see the data available on the case study of Walt Disney and how he creates this delightful customer experiences. So it's important that employees feel motivated, charged, aligned to the common purpose of the organization. Only then will you be able to deliver this experience to your customers. And their brand promise and their customer promise is all similar. So the process has to be an enabler to the brand's promise of fast, efficient service. It can't be a hurdle. So make sure that your processes that support your promise, whatever promise you want to make. If I and Max Life Insurance have made a promise of, I want to give, we are in the business of giving honest advice that's right for the customer. We have backed it through processes. Now, in our business, where you sell through third-party distributors who are not your own employees, we are doing it to the best of our ability. We are saying that any customer who is met, if you have to give them an honest advice, you have to do a need analysis. Now, that need analysis has to be done through a scientific fact-finding process. Now, that fact-finding process, we realized that we made it mandatory, that if a customer is bought and if there's no fact-finding process note or a form attached along with the application, it will get rejected. We realized that the forms were getting filled up, but the authenticity of those forms is becoming a question mark, because sometimes we as customers do not give that kind of time to the advisor, and he's not able to do a good job of filling the fact-find. Now we are in the midst of trying to find a technology solution where actually, if the tech process enables this fact-find process where the customer doesn't feel that it is burdensome or the advisor doesn't feel that he's spending a lot of time, a whole lot of these things are coming as an app on a tablet. And we are making sure that we give tablets from company's side to every employee loaded with this application, so that we know, and then this technology is connecting and giving us the data back, which advisor has met how many customers, administered this process how many times, and what's the quality of that output. So that is the process that we follow in our company to deliver honest advice. Moving on to physical evidence. Do the customer forms make life easy or difficult for the customer? Are the account statements and documents easy to understand? How many asterisks are there next to the brand's promise? All those things is something that we just spoke about. So make sure that your documents, your website, go to your website and see how simple it is, how easy it is to navigate. And that physical today doesn't mean physical paper, but wherever the customer is, wherever you are communicating with the customer, whichever mode in which you're communicating with the customer. Like I said, the tablets and the fact-finding forms that we've created, we're trying to make it as user-friendly, as visually engaging as possible, so that it doesn't seem burdensome to get that information from the clients. And yet that information is very important, because on the basis of that, can you give an honest advice? So today technology is available, make use of it, but please remember that the 3 P's of customer service are people, processes, physical evidence. We'll now move on to, like I said, the relationship management framework. And if you look at this framework, this will help you actually analyze your customer relationship process and put it into some form of a kind of a framework that will allow you to track it. If you just move on from the pictorial to the next one, you might find it a little easier to understand. The next slide, which says the integrated customer value management strategy requires multiple enablers, is actually an open version of the drawing that you've seen. So the integrated customer value management strategy requires multiple enablers. The consumer purchase journey of your business is the first thing that you should map out. And my experience is that this journey does not change. Let's go through the steps of the journey, and then we will come, which is there right in the middle, which says identifying needs. You begin by understanding the client's needs, deciding to buy, executing the buy. Once the customer has purchased, comes the after-sales service. After-sales service, once the customer has bought, there could be problems that could come with the product or the service, resolving problems. Product life cycle transition. Now, what does this mean? Products have a shelf life. The customer might want to move on from that product into something else. Today, I am driving a motorcycle which is valued at 30,000 rupees. My life stage has evolved. Now I want to buy a motorcycle that is at least a lakh of rupees. Now, life cycle transactions, whether within your category, whether within your product, or whether outside, is a very important step in the customer journey. It's important to recognize this, that if you have a product offering which is an upgradation within your product portfolio, you might follow a completely different strategy for cross-sell and upsell. But if you don't have a product and you are only catering to that segment, you end the journey there, but you end it on a goodwill, where you make sure that there is a word of mouth, there's a positive experience that he's had, and he will speak to 10 other people who are into that income segment, who want to buy your product, to actually come to you. So it varies from category to category, company to company. Coming back, like I said, will differ completely on whether you have a cross-sell opportunity or an upsell opportunity with the customer, or you are actually gracefully taking a goodwill from him and using that to enroll new people into your segment. Buying again and relationship building. We will go through this in a little detail in the next slide. But if you stay on this slide, what is important, like I said, is people, processes. Now, those processes have to be backed by technology, by data quality and BI analytics. If you do not have analytics in the company, you will not get aggregated insights. You will get experiences, you will get anecdotes. Those observations are very important. But the power of those becomes important if you start aggregating and you have an analytics engine and you have a place where you're actually aggregating data and you're having insights that come from a collective view, because insights become trends and trends become, gives you insights into developing future products only when you have a data analytics capability with your customers. With the data, you're also able to see how is your customer segmented, what is their age profile, what is their income profile, who are the kind of people who are buying you. Today, natural language inciting also allows you to give you information beyond just the demographics. You can also, through data analytics, understand what's their sentiment with respect to your brand. Like we said, if they're leaving a bad comment on Facebook today, analytics is able to pick up and tell you that the sentiment in the social world with respect to my brand is positive, negative, or neutral. So all kinds of tools are available that give you insights into data and that can be used for business. So have your people and org culture, have your processes, and have processes that are based on technology and analytics. So at every step of the way, it's important to have a business goal. Business goal to say that finally you're doing all this. We all do this because of three large customer CRM objectives. One is to actually increase your revenue. And there is cost that sits behind this. If I have to invest in a data warehouse and if I have to invest in a tool that measures the sentiment, I need to demonstrate the business value of this. Unless and until you don't set a goal on revenue enhancement, either through more purchase or through cross-sell or upsell. So that's one big objective of CRM, which is revenue enhancement, and it's possible to convert it into a tangible target. That I will actually look at my existing customer base giving me at least 20% of the revenue in the next financial year. I'm just taking that as an example. Or you can say that 25% of my customers will buy again from me. Another 30% of my customers will upgrade to another product. It's important, whichever category you are in, to set a business goal of revenue from this exercise. Only then will you get the investments to go behind the processes and the tech. So put a very tangible business objective. So one objective is revenue enhancement. The second objective also is cost saves. And I will talk about cost saves when we go to the measurements and some of the other things that I'm saying. How much efficiency you will bring into the business by following the CRM framework is something that I will talk a little more in detail as we go forward, but that's the second business goal. And the third business goal is customer engagement and loyalty. Goodwill, positive word of mouth, can again be measured in different ways, and we have a few slides again as we go forward on how to measure customer engagement and what are the different ways in which we can measure it. The minute you set a business goal to it and you show that as an opportunity to your business, this journey moves from just softer aspects to making it a hardcore business mandate. When you design we're moving onwards to the next slide, which says a 6-point approach to design the desired consumer experience at each stage of the life cycle. When you design the processes at each stage of the customer life cycle, there are 6 questions that you have to ask at each stage. Identifying needs, let's take that. What is the customer expectations? What is the emotion evoked? That's a very important point, the emotion evoked. What's our promise? How we will deliver? Who is responsible for delivering that promise? And what are the measures of success? Let's take an example of, identifying needs. Let's pick up one category. I am going to buy a car, okay? And I am a first-time customer of, I could be a first-time customer of that car. When I'm looking at identifying his needs, the needs of the customer segment can be very different. Let's say I'm buying a small car and my need is that I want to reach, I am using public transport. Petrol has become very expensive. Today I want to upgrade because I'm now going to get married as well. Let me buy a car. Now if that's a first time buyer, that's his need. The need of a person who's already got a car and he's buying a second car, it's again a 3 lakh car, could be very different. I have a large car, I have a problem with parking, and I can't, each time I take my big car out, I find it very difficult to park. Okay, today I can afford to buy a second car. Let me take a second car. I will only take it to places where there is a parking problem. Now that need is very different from somebody who's buying his first car, but it's still same 3 lakh car. Or it could be a third person who would say, my wife or my daughter is now learning to drive. She's, she wants to get mobile. So let me buy a 3 lakh car or a second car for my wife or for my daughter. Now the need of the wife and the daughter could be very different. They've just learned driving. They want a car which is basically which is simple to drive and which has easy maneuverability. The need of a fourth person could be just something very different. I'm a merchant. This is my, I'm just changing my car. I mean, I just need good mileage and good service. It's important that you identify your segment and you identify the needs of that segment before you move forward. So that's the first step when I say identifying needs. What is the customer's expectations? For each of these needs, the emotions are very different. If I'm buying a car for my wife or for my daughter, my emotions are very different from somebody who is just wanting to buy a fuel-efficient car. So please go through these questions very carefully with respect to your category, with respect to your product, and at each stage of the journey. And this same thing, let me move forward. I might not have time to go at each stage one by one. When you are executing the buy, supposing you've decided to buy this car, and you finally reached the service showroom. What is the customer expectation when he reaches the dealership? He is, after a whole lot of deliberation and decision making and what brand and what car and what color, he finally reaches the showroom. What are his expectations of the showroom and the dealer staff? He wants a good test drive. He wants to be shown all colors. He wants somebody to engage with him because it is the most important purchase of his life. So please understand customer expectations and emotions. If he is with his family, his expectations and his excitement levels will be very different from a trader who's come to buy his car because he is basically, just needing a fuel efficient car. He needs to only know about the mileage and the fuel efficiency and the service cost each time, understand his expectations at that moment in time when he's sitting in the dealership, and customize your promise accordingly. So that's very important, and all these things get done through processes and through trainings. So at each stage of the journey, go through these 6 questions. In our business, we have actually written it down. We've written down for identifying needs, what are the customer expectations, what are the emotions, what's the promise, who will deliver it, and what's the KPI measurement at this stage. Right for the end-to-end. If you can actually put it down in the form of a template and use this template, you will realize once it is there, you will create processes behind it, you will create measures behind it, and all of that becomes doable then. Like I said, we might not have the time to go through all of it. So we'll move on to the CRM toolkit, which is basically summing up what I was telling you in the previous slide. Identifying needs, it's important that you understand customer data and trends. You might not want to deal with all the customers at any given point of time. You will have a lead segment. You will say, this is my largest segment. Let me focus on this segment first. That segmentation in CRM is very important because it's not necessary that a second-time car buyer is your biggest segment. Your biggest segment, the reason why Tata Nano, when it got launched, did not do so well in the country is the largest segment that they wanted to target was people who they thought will upgrade from a motorcycle. That definition of the target segment itself was wrong. They realized after they created the best product at the most phenomenal price point, it was supposed to have actually created and washed out all other small cars from the market. But today that car is nowhere. that whole example of how they did not get the segment right, how they did not get the need right, that was not the segment that was moving into Nano. There's a heavy price that they paid for it. So those are some of the things that each business needs to understand. What's the largest target segment? What is the biggest need that I'm trying to solve for? And align the proposition, brand promise and customer promise to that. If you go through, when you identify the customer data and trends, you will have to look at all kinds of, data, analytics, like I said, and that's available only if you have analytics and data warehousing capabilities to tell you not just the demographic information about the customer, but about today larger information about what are his preferences. I mean, today if you look at, when I can look at my business, we know exactly who pays premium on time, which customer actually defaults each time, who is the customer who needs to be given 3 reminders before he pays his premium, what case size product has he bought from us, did he buy it for his children, is he a potential customer for cross-sell and upsell. We have now refined this to an extent where we've got predictive analytics available to say that these are the customers who will buy again from us, and this kind of a product, he has the potential of buying another child plan or no. Now that information, whether he can buy another child plan, I cannot know if I don't have his contact information and his family details. Now those are how things link up. So have as much data about your customer as possible. There is, you will find it at various places. There are 21 essential data fields that are right from contact information to some demographic information to software information. A minimum, if you have 21 data fields of your customers, not from one source, but from multiple sources that you've used technology to aggregate, you can do brilliant predictive analytics on which customer to target for what kind of potential. Define customers that you need to target. Continuing that will eventually tell you who you should go after. But before you do that, it's important to understand that you will have to trade off. You cannot reach all the segments. No business should go out and say that I am here to reach out to everybody. It's a disastrous thing. You will have to identify your segments. Now the science of segmentation is a separate module by itself. I can spend separate 2 hours trying to take you through how segmentation is done and what are the different ways in which segmentation businesses do it. Attitudinal segmentation, behavioral, demographic, sentimental, this thing, combination of tools. So that's a different session, like I said, but you must go through your exercise of segmentation because you cannot cater to everybody if you have to follow this process. The next slide, slide number 3 on the CRM tools, tells you identify the most effective targeting strategy and deploy effectively. Like I said, it's a separate module by itself, but here are some questions that will help you, come to which approach to adopt for segmentation. I don't know how many of you have heard of, Pareto principle. Basically, Pareto principle is saying that any mature business you go to, any company that has been into business for a few years, you will know that there is an 80-20 rule that applies. 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers. And that is why the entire previous conversation and slides on segmentation become important. So segmentation is important for the targeting purposes of identifying needs, which customers you want to target. Segmentation is also important once you have a customer book and you know that so-and-so is my customer. Segmentation is also important to say now within this customer base, if I have 5 million customers in a service industry, you have large customer bases like ours. It is important to know out of these 5 million, which are the 20% where I should actually be doing a one-on-one relationship management through my advisors. Or my contact strategy and my email strategy and my SMS strategy today. If I start sending SMSs and emails to all 5 million customer database, it's a very expensive proposition. So segmentation becomes important at the times of targeting. Segmentation becomes important at the time of customer management as well. So that is what Pareto principle is all about. 80% of business comes out of 20% of your customers, and there is a science behind how to arrive at the 20%. What are the logics and algorithms you put in place to come to that? Arrive at the 20% and put all your efforts behind the 20%. You will get disproportionate results on the business goals of revenue on cost efficiencies. People put disproportionate effort behind the 20% and actually do the cost saves from the bottom 20%. So you save money from the bottom 20%. You should be willing to even let that bucket leak out, because you don't want to cultivate and put your investments behind them. So let the bottom 20% be open to leaking them out. There is the middle 60% which is on a maintenance job, and there's the top 20% which is on an enhancement and an engagement role. So that's how the Pareto principle works, and you have to apply this to your business as well. The next slide is basically an example of Pareto principle applied in business scenario, is to increase productivity, to help you prioritize, focus on critical initiatives, take appropriate action to resolve issues when it comes to customer service. So a whole lot of these things. So you know when you're focusing out of 5 million only on 20%, you would know that I can afford to spend disproportionate time on these. Whereas you can't do that when you're actually treating all 5 million in the same way. Put your efforts where they will make the most difference is what is the principle of Pareto. Again, the next slide on multiple advantages of segmentation. There are a whole lot of benefits listed out there. You may refer to them, because this is something that is very, very hygiene in CRM business. Moving on to the fourth, CRM toolkit point, which is measure and monitor. Now, there are different things that you have to measure, and there are different things that you have to monitor. And different companies use different tools to do this. You don't have to, everybody has got different tools. There is no one tool, but I will just give you some examples of how it is measured. Of course, there are business measures. Business measures are the first measure. Enhanced productivity, cost efficiencies are the biggest measures. But satisfaction of the customer, engagement of the customer, which is where because the other two are internal measures. You can measure how efficient your business is. The satisfaction measures and engagement measures is when you have to deploy and use an external tool to help you do that. There is a net promoter index or a net promoter score, which is the NPI. Okay, and I have a slide subsequent to this where I will take this in further detail, but that's one measure of customer satisfaction. The second measure is, of course, transactional feedback. If you are in a business where you can and you are in a position of capturing transactional feedback, whether it is from a call center, whether it is from a sales manager who's sitting and interacting with the customer, if technology today is allowing you to capture that feedback and aggregate it at one place, that's what you should be doing, because that's real-time feedback. Every day, if there are dashboards coming to you, or at the end of the day, from an employee from a call center, this thing, how many customers called? Is your complaint ratio declining or increasing? What is the nature of complaints? Are most of the complaints of a certain kind? If you get that dashboard almost on a daily basis and somebody is looking at it, you would be taking real action on fixing the resolutions then and there. So do not actually compromise on transactional data that is available to businesses. Aggregating it, converting it into a dashboard and having a visibility of it on a daily basis, and having action planning meetings and people who are responsible for measuring and governing those. complaints and compliments from various sources are as important. If you have a website and people are leaving their comments there, or if you have a blog page, or if you have a place, you know, where customers are leaving complaints, or whether it is the call center or whether it's the customer service desk, from whichever source complaints and compliments are coming, technology today allows you to aggregate it at one place. You aggregate it, you analyze it, you get a view of how many satisfied customers you have. So transactional feedback and complaints and compliments are more or less internal processes that help you do that. The NPI and the customer satisfaction surveys are external surveys that help you do that. CSAT surveys today, customer satisfaction surveys, are random samples. There are research agencies, small and large, that do that on a syndicated basis. We've subscribed to IMRB. They do the CSAT survey for the industry. They also do blind surveys. So depending on the scale and size of your business, customer satisfaction in surveys should be undertaken, if not on a quarterly or the monthly frequency, at least on an annual frequency. If you want greater frequency of taking feedback from customers, service industries do that very beautifully. They write to you immediately after you've experienced, and they ask you through an SMS, hope you had a good experience. Even if 90% of the people do not respond, the statistics will tell you that when you have lived in a hotel room, or when you have called a call center employee at Mahindra Resorts or any bank branch or any telecom service operator, immediately an SMS comes to you or an email comes to you seeking your experience feedback. 90% of the people do not respond. That tells you that they are people who respond are people who are either extremely delighted or people who are irate customers. People who had satisfactory experience normally do not respond. Now that's one data point. But that also tells you that if they haven't responded, there is no great issue. They were reasonably satisfied. There are people, but the people who write back to you are people who actually outliers, who either felt very delighted, they felt so happy that they bothered to write back, or they are your regular customers and they feel a responsibility towards you as a business to give you feedback because they've engaged, they are loyal to you as customers. Or then there are unhappy customers who you left dissatisfied, who still want to be contacted, and they think by responding they will have, you know, the company will come back to them again. So those kind of survey opinions are also important at that moment in time. Like I said, I have a slide again on what an NPI is and what a Net Promoter Score is. And if you move on to basically Net Promoter Score rules out everything. They're saying all that you measure, transactional, complaints, compliments, finally there is only one measure. It should lead you to a customer either buying again or recommending you. So this Net Promoter Score works on this whole simple philosophy of, would you recommend us to a friend or colleague? You might have, as a business, done phenomenally well on everything. The customer is satisfied with you. But if he is not recommending you, if a customer does not recommend a Max Life product to his friend or a colleague, which means that you still have more headroom for growth, for doing more in the CRM space. Because while you've satisfied him, he's still not your brand ambassador. So NPS works on this whole thing of recommending to a friend or a colleague. It takes care of both head and heart, you know, because when you recommend, you are putting your personal credibility behind it. And that you will only put your personal credibility behind it if you have been more than just satisfied, you've been delighted. So what it does is, the way it measures is the next slide. How do we measure Net Promoter Score is, extremely unlikely are the detractors. Okay, so the promoters minus the detractors is the Net Promoter Score. So what they do is, extremely likely to recommend are the promoters. You minus from that extremely unlikely, which is the detractors, and you get then the net score. It would have been very easy to measure that the number of people who are extremely likely to recommend you. They made the measure tougher by saying, but the people who actually are detractors, if they are 60% and your promoters are only 10%, they are actually taking away from you. Because don't forget, detractors have a multiplier effect of 1:14. Every person who is had extremely unlikely would speak to 14 other people to dissuade them. So this is a very, very tough measure. The science behind this is just getting evolved. It's not completely there. That it's not, say for example, we've tested the NPS out and we are not able to apply it to our business yet. But some of the easier categories like FMCG, like telecom, more easier categories have adopted them. And there are some, internationally this is a very big measure. And all the examples that I've given to you in the subsequent slides are from international companies where, of course, the higher the NPS, the higher the customer engagement. And these are large organizations, Harley-Davidson's, almost iconic brands, Costco, Amazon, eBay, Southwest Airlines. The higher the customer engagement NPS score, the better the company is on customer satisfaction and CRM. So those were some of the measures of CRM. If I were to just recap, we went through, the first section was all about how, before you get to any science, knowing your customer, being observant, making an effort to cultivate a relationship, all the real gurus of CRM that we spoke about it's important to know your customer and strike a relationship with them. That's the first part. Then we spoke about, like there are 4 P's of marketing, there are 3 P's of customer relationship management. People, processes, and physical evidences. From there we move to saying that there is a clear customer relationship framework which runs across the customer lifecycle journey, from identifying needs to buying again, and loyalty and engagement. Map out your customer journey. At each touch points in the customer journey, there are 6 questions that you need to ask. You have to identify the need. You have to understand what are customer expectations, what emotions does it evoke, how will your product fulfill it, who will fulfill it, how will you measure it. There are those 6 points. So we went through that customer purchase journey framework. Then we came to the CRM toolkit. CRM toolkit will help you realize that when you are doing the customer purchase journey, it's important that you follow a segmented approach, a Pareto approach, before you start doing the customer journey. You might want to first focus only on the top 20% of your customers and do this journey separately for the top 20% of the customers, because they give you 80% of the revenue. Once we finish that, we came to, there are different ways of measuring it. There are transactional ways of measuring it. There are survey-based ways of measuring it, and there is NPS, which is the single largest measure of measuring it. So we've covered an entire gamut of CRM management today, and that's it from my side. I would want to now, leave some time for questions and discussions if you have any. Thank you.